Hello and welcome to the Armchair Show. I'm your moderator, Tanisha, and I'm so thrilled to have you guys here with me today. As you can tell, we've got a wonderful suite of guests with us today, and I'm very excited. I guess if we could start with a quick introduction from yourself, Stuart, of who you are, where you're from, what you do.
Okay, my name's Stuart Buckley, founder of Barbuck. Our purpose in life is to identify hidden opportunities, make them measurable, so our customers can sell more.
Fantastic.
Adam Derbyshire, Managing Director of Spirit Motor Group, which is Hyundai and MG brands.
Elliot Perks, the co-founder and CEO of Jigcar. We build operational software for the automotive industry.
Ollie Philpott, I'm a co-founder and CEO of Generational, and we develop battery health testing and certification for dealers, help them give confidence to used EV buyers.
Perfect. So I thought today it would be a very good subject for us to talk about EVs, new and used EVs today, as you've all got very different wealth of experience and all from all very different perspectives, whether it's from selling vehicles, whether it's from the software, testing or actually handling those inquiries themselves. So I guess if we could just kind of kickstart with a quick peek into what's happening with the EV market at the moment. I guess a quick overview. I don't know from yourself, from a dealer perspective, of what you're seeing.
EVs, yeah. So the demand for EVs is increasing all the time, from both a new car and used car perspective. I think from the new car perspective, that's driven by greater customer awareness of EVs, an understanding of what it means to own an EV. But also now the plethora of new product which is coming to the market, giving more choice, making it more exciting to consider an EV as a new car. And then coupled with that are the financial offers and tactical support that's available from the manufacturers, which is also driving from a transaction and affordability perspective, owning an EV. And again, from the affordability perspective with the new products, the products are now becoming much more accessible from an affordability perspective to a much wider audience. So that is naturally fueling demand and increasing vehicle sales. And the same is exactly the same for the used car market, driven by slightly different dynamics. Affordability is definitely improving from a used car. Some of that sadly due to very high depreciation of initial vehicles coming onto the market and still is fueling that to a degree. But also now more models are coming on to the market, so there is more choice of EVs, but they do represent fantastic value for money. So that also increases demand from the used car market, and affordability is a massive part of that market.
And I guess a good question perhaps for Elliot as well, this question. But does the used EV stock behave differently in comparison to traditional petrol or diesel vehicles in terms of, I guess, placement, rotation, the types of things that customers are looking for?
I think for us, the core competency is, at the moment anyway, is the transport of vehicles. And we're seeing just a lot of, obviously, new cars being sold as fleet and a high proportion of those being EVs, and they all need to be transported rather than driven. And so that's really driving up the cost of a fleet operation, because a transported movement over 100 miles could cost you £200 versus maybe £120 driven. So it makes a massive difference, and we see that happening. But in terms of site to site retail movements, I think whether it's an EV or not, they're going to move based on customer demand. So if a customer's at site A wants to see a car at site C, it'll move regardless.
You've obviously seen a gap in the market with battery EV testing. Wasn't something traditionally we needed in the market. Battery is obviously an ongoing concern that customers have. We've seen that since day one. The first EV came out of the concerns about batteries. How does what you do help ease perhaps some of those concerns for both dealers and the consumers?
Yeah, so essentially we provide a super simple solution for retailers to perform a battery health check. You just need an app on your phone and a little OBD diagnostic unit that plugs into the car. So it takes about minute or two. You run a test and we generate a certificate that gives buyers all the most important information they would need to make a decision on that used EV. So the manufacturer state of health of the battery, the warranty information, how much, because batteries are warranted separately, and the real range of that car under different scenarios. And there's an interesting piece of research by Cox Automotive that came out probably about 6-8 weeks ago. They did two sets of research, one on new vehicles and one on used EVs as well. And the number one thing that used EV buyers wanted was more information on battery health and warranties, because it's just one of those uncertainties at the moment, right? People, I think, I'm on the Facebook forums for a lot of the different owner models, and a lot of them you can see there's this concern coming through, right? That people aren't just buying a vehicle, perhaps it's this future liability, this thing that's going to break, and it's going to cost them 10 or 20 grand to get replaced, right? So I think really we help dealers provide that reassurance to people, and the data is good, right? It's much better than people expect. The battery degradation is not like your iPhone.
I think that will increase as well, the demand for that type of reassurance, because as customers get more and more used to EVs and consideration of EVs and more knowledge of what an EV is, that will actually create more questions, maybe different questions, but it won't stop the questions. It will just create more. And batteries at the moment is definitely, we'd agree with that. And that also affects your stock turn as a dealer, which is hugely important because of depreciation rates. So you have to have your stock turn very fast on an EV to avoid month-on-month depreciation.
Yeah.
How do we better ease those concerns? Because we've been in the industry, we've been talking about those concerns since day one, right? It's not new. Customers are still nervous; they're still concerned. I think in some of the perhaps lead handling that Stuart sees that those leads aren't always dealt with in the best possible way. So how do we do better? What advice could we give to dealers to get better at that?
From a dealer's perspective, I think it's about information being available to the customer to answer the questions that the customers currently have, and then moving forward, being advanced in knowing what questions coming next. That's on our digital platforms, so our websites, etc., and our social media channels, to create awareness and trust that that's a good product to go and look at, because they've already answered my questions. They've spoken about battery health. They've spoken about range anxiety. So they know what they're doing. And I think that's a big part of a customer journey, is they need to go and they want to have the confidence. And when they go into that showroom, they're going to speak to someone that understands about owning an EV and the tech behind the EV. So that's sales training. That's then. So the digital and sales training, digital communications, sales training, that all has to connect so that everyone is on the same page. That then gets the customer in the showroom, gives them the confidence to come in and talk about your product, and then what deals, etc., you've got, and that's I think for me the most important factor.
Yeah, I think the thing I'd add there is something we hear from our customer base, and I think you mentioned this earlier, is there's a very wide profile of buyers now coming into EVs, people who have done tons of research on YouTube beforehand and have got super detailed questions, and others who are perhaps like just starting to explore it and saying, are these cars even better, right? Is it a good car? Can I take it through a car wash, or all those kind of things, right? And so being armed with being able to hold the hand of customers and that plethora of that range of starting points, I think is a big challenge for dealers. But transparency and information, I think, is the thing that underlines every point for people on the journey.
And I guess when it comes to managing the quality of leads and inquiries come through, what are you seeing from that point of view? Where can dealers get better at helping EV customers?
Again, knowledge, understand the kind of questions they're asking. So the visibility around knowing what types of things people ask. So you're prepared, training point of view. This is like, the top 10 questions you're going to get asked, and just make sure you've got the information there. And just, for me, measure, check, repeat, train, measure, check, repeat, train. Because if you haven't got visibility of what the customers are saying, or more importantly, what your staff are saying to the customers, well, as we've seen, things just fall down the gap, and you don't even know that customers engage with your business because You can't check every single call. You can't check every single lead follow-up. I mean, AI is changing some of that stuff, but again, it's just make it as much visible as possible and measure it. That's
What should they be measuring? What metrics do you recommend dealers do look at?
just understanding what's being. So the thing that I kind of see the most at the moment is people contacting a business, having a conversation, and for whatever reason, that conversation is either, well, I'm going to get back to you, or from the customer perspective, I'm not too sure, thanks for the answers, off I go, or the business saying, we'll come back to you, and that information not being logged anywhere. Massive problem. But without AI, without the tech we have, without the ability to read through these form fills, questions, whatever it is that the customers are asking, without that visibility, you can't measure, and without the measurement, you don't know where you are, and things may seem harder than they actually are because these things aren't getting logged. Once it's logged, so log everything that comes into the business and make a decision as to whether you as a business owner or a management team believe that is an opportunity that you can do something about. Don't leave that decision with that person that's dealing with that frontline customer. That's my perspective.
I think there's a really interesting thing that one of our prospects said to me a few weeks ago around this. It was, we were talking about testing batteries and how we were doing a trial, and it hadn't. One site said, "Look, it just hasn't come up as part of a customer question." So there is a flip side to that, which is that I think there's that survivorship bias story of bombers that come back from World War II, right? And all the bullet holes are on the wings, and then they patch up the places where the bullet holes are, and actually, well, that's all the ones that survive. So those ones can cope with it, right? And so there is a flip side to that, which is that. And then in this dealer context, it was actually they weren't bringing in the customers who had concerns about battery longevity and battery health, right? So those people didn't even get that far in the funnel to then raise issues and track them because the website structure wasn't there to hold the hand of the customer, and they couldn't find that information earlier in the funnel.
Yeah, and that's when we see people drop out. So we were talking with Google on the last podcast I was here for. About how the disconnect between if that piece of information is not in front of a customer, they will go, well, I need to know. And that's when they pick the phone up, that's when they ring. And that's where we see the drop off, because maybe someone has asked that question, but if it's on a phone call, you're not going to listen to every single call. So try and identify it. But yeah, I mean, websites, don't get me started. Okay. It's like, wow. Do the images even load? No, okay, fine.
Well, I think that's the website, that's both OEM level and then at dealer level. And I think that one of the big problems is, I think as an industry and a supply chain to the customer, we're still behind what the customer needs.
Yeah.
And it's who's going to do what first, and it's never been more important.
Yeah, there's a degree of people trying to take the customer through the journey they want them to go through.
Yes. Which tends to be affordability.
Yeah.
Because that's what the salespeople tend to gravitate towards, as opposed to the softer sell. And we experienced this when we first went through our EV training internally. It's not about affordability. Clearly, that's going to come into it because it always does. But before you get to that stage, you have to build the confidence. And the sales process hasn't really changed from an ICE vehicle to an EV. But there's much more heavy weighted towards the softer side now, and the knowledge and the product presentation than there ever is because of customer understanding. And I think that's still taking people by surprise, particularly, and you're right, with the salespeople and things falling through a hole, every salesperson is slightly different. And how confident they are in selling a product and how confident they are on selling a deal. And there's two very different types of salespeople. So how do you select the right salespeople and train the right salespeople to offer a consistent experience to the customer? And from a dealer perspective, that's really challenging. Very challenging.
So across multiple sites as well. So you've got sort of two dealerships doing the same thing, same product, very, very different.
Yes.
Perhaps management.
Because you've got human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. How do you overcome that? Don't know. To be confirmed.
AI.
I don't know. Maybe.
Could get AI to just do this whole podcast, and we could just go home.
Get AI to do Hoovering at home would be good, but.
Where do you see EV sales heading in the next 3 to 5 years? Because we can see the numbers are increasing, more and more people are interested in EVs. That creates some logistical challenges that we were that we were just discussing. But what does the next 3 to 5 years look like, do we think, in terms of EV market?
I think EVs are going to continue growing. I think they'll plateau, and I think market to market around the world will change dependent on legislation, taxation, and the manufacturer's desire to be present in that market. That's I think where it starts. I think from our perspective in the UK, there's still a lot to go at from potential customers. I think as we start, where it will start to plateau is when we saturate the part of the market where EVs makes real sense, home charging. As soon as we sort of saturated the home charging market, people that have got access to home charging market, and we start to move towards the plethora, huge amount of people that are in terraced housing, apartments, etc., that's when it's going to become even more of a challenge. And that's when I think governments are going to have to step in with public charging solutions, make that more affordable, because it is crazy that it's more expensive to charge an EV publicly than it is to go and fill up an ICE car. And a customer simply will not understand that. Other than a potential environmental argument, it doesn't make sense. So we're not there yet, but it is clearly, it's being talked about on the media and with the politicians. So it is coming. But I think EV demand will continue growing until we hit those plateaus. But government can accelerate or decelerate that.
But increase in demand is going to create more of a logistical nightmare for dealers. So for dealers that are kind of forecasting that increase, what can they start to do now, I guess, to tackle those challenges now, to kind of reduce those increased costs, to reduce those challenges that you described at the start?
I think we just see more cars being moved generally as part of the retail model since it's become omni-channel, since you've got more, sites like Site C selling cars at Site A, stuff moving between them. You've got fleet home deliveries, buying off private customers like on Motorway, CarWow. So for us, there's just every way you look at it, and if you look at other retail industries, it's done the same, like more product moves. And so the only way to really address that, we think, to really benefit from it, is to centralize your transport function, to really think in the same way you would often centralize buying your stock, is actually centralize thinking about how it's moving. Have one person or a small team overseeing every single movement that happens, making sure that if you've got a driver taking a car from A to B, they're also taking the car that's going from B to A rather than two drivers crossing themselves, which currently happens all the time. So I think the biggest win is centralizing from a decentralized transport model, which I think every group will go down. And we're beginning to work with more that have already done it, and the amount they save is incredible. It's like £60 per vehicle movement just from centralizing their transport function. And you can probably do it without hiring people as well. You just take people already in the business and you just get them to basically oversee the movement of cars.
I think that's somewhere where the OEMs could really step in and support, particularly on smaller businesses where you don't have the resource to operate more of a logistics section. The OEMs could really help the dealer networks by freeing up the movement of stock via transportation.
Yeah, definitely.
Particularly used car stock.
Definitely think it's such a bottleneck in stock turn. If we often see that you've got, let's say, 50% of used cars often being sold from different sites to the ones they're at, or they're going to a central prep hub and they're coming back, and that movement is taking 5 working days. That's every single one of those days is just a bottleneck in your stock turn, particularly if a customer's put a deposit down on one site and they're just waiting for the car to get to them. So for the OEM as well, that's obviously a huge problem, because they just want their dealers to be turning as much stock as possible.
Yes, and reducing their own inventory that they've got sat waiting.
Exactly. So yeah, it's definitely, I think centralization is probably going to be the core theme across retail groups, really. And if you look at all of the groups that have been bought by PE firms, the first thing the PE firm has come in and done is said, like, you're going to centralize your stock buying, you're going to centralize your transport, etc., etc. And yeah, they've looked at it in depth and thought this is where we can cut costs.
That makes a lot of sense. And then in terms of, I guess, metrics like battery health, do you find that it's more, I guess, peace of mind for dealers and sales execs selling the products that are perhaps still a little bit nervous themselves, or the kind of the consumer? Where do you kind of see the biggest impact in that testing?
So I think that it started with consumers wanting reassurance. And I think that demand is now filtering up earlier in the value chain, because it probably needs some more months for this to pan out. But you've now got the valuation companies looking at how battery health might be reflected in the value of a vehicle, because a battery is what costs 50% more than an engine is. It for a lot of people their battery will be the most valuable thing they own, bar a house, right? So I feel like it started with consumers, and now we have some dealers who, if they've got 10 Renault Zoes on the forecourt and one's got a better battery than the others, they know they can charge a bit more for that. And I personally would, I'd definitely pay 500 quid more for a car with a good battery, right? And then so that's filtering up now to auction houses, to the lease codes, and you've got thousands of vehicles coming off lease, and these businesses who need to get their money back, right, to invest and write new finance agreements, thinking about should I sell this direct to consumer, should I put this one through auction, and wanting to differentiate those vehicles and get the best price for them. So I think we're currently at that stage where the majority of our customer base is retailers, who are testing stock when they bring it in. A lot of them will set a kind of minimum threshold for retail and say, I won't retail anything below 80, for example, 80% state of health, and also using it to de-risk the part exchanges that they're starting to get back, right? So those edge cases are rare. But if it happens one in 100, one in a couple of hundred vehicles that's got a really badly degraded battery, that's an expensive hit to take if your business is built on fast stock turn and relatively thin margins, right? So I think that's sort of my honest assessment of where the market is. I think we're getting there further upstream. But a little way to go there. But the vast majority of results is dealers de-risking themselves and creating confidence for the used buyers, particularly as we move towards that kind of early majority of buyers, away from the really early adopters who might do tons of research and be super prepared for their purchase.
I think that's, from a part exchange perspective as a dealer, that's where you make your profit as you use cars. It's what you buy it for, but not really what you sell it for. And if you want to be able to take the right part exchanges and de-risk, that problem's going to increase because the more EVs, we're going to see more and more EVs coming in as part exchanges as we continue trading. There's more in the vehicle park.
Yeah.
So that is going to become a bigger thing. And I think the other thing there that's interesting is at what point will the residual value setters, the likes of CAP, etc., and the confidence the lease companies have and finance companies in setting RVs for the future, which will directly impact the monthly payment that a customer will spend. When will battery longevity and health, particularly on a used vehicle, become key to that RV, which will have a dramatic impact on the affordability? Yeah,
I know. I definitely think that, and I think those companies are thinking about it now, and they've had it on their backlog for a few years, and now there's starting to be the data there. But the value setters they can't dictate the market; they have to reflect the market, right? So actually, what they will look at companies like us and look at our data sets and use that to build into their models, because they can't be seen to be saying this is what the pricing is. They have to kind of reflect how the market's behaving. But we're seeing it pan out in how people are buying vehicles already. And also on those excessively degraded ones. We had a customer a few weeks ago who, I've talked about this before, one car slipped through the net, just didn't get tested for some reason, and it was a 100,000 mile used EV, and the battery was degraded down to about 44%. That car would only do about 35 miles on a full charge. That's hard to sell. And that is very much an anomaly, but one of those can really hurt your P&L. You might find as well that the insurance companies will start stepping in, because a degraded battery puts more risk on the problems that, the horrible problems you sometimes have with batteries when they catch fire. And that tends to be for where cells are degrading. So the battery's degrading and they overload the other cells. That causes a thermal event, in the politically correct way to use it. And that's dramatically difficult for the insurance companies and then the manufacturers. Yeah, and also on something I think about is financing of used vehicles as well, right? Because a more degraded battery, you're taking more like a bigger risk position there as a finance company, right? So and there's starting to be some that now don't finance certain vehicles because they've had battery issues on those ones in the used market.
On that
right?
model line. Right.
Yeah, and I don't think we want a market where that's like that's not really the answer, right? It's probably actually just like diagnostics and saying like there's an issue with this asset, rather than saying all of this model line we won't work with, right? Because finance is going to be a super important part for people's access to mobility, even in the used market.
What do they do with those cars? If it's a 40% battery, what?
It's getting harder, right? It's getting harder to deal with that because you previously you could probably push that to trade, push it through auction, right? And you might just get away with it, but increasingly they're getting tested and picked up. So
It's a stack of cars at 40%. I mean, maybe the battery's too expensive. Just imagine this
That's the issue
parking
with
lot full of.
battery pairs, right? Is that like at the moment there's not a particularly mature market for repairing batteries, and also there's an increasing trend for manufacturers to make batteries less modular in order to get the list price down, right? So they're becoming harder to repair. So yeah, like it's becoming more of a challenge. But there are places out there, good businesses out there that are doing some battery repairs, but there's highly skilled people. There's a labour cost there, and you've got to find a new battery for somewhere. So it's tricky.
Yeah, yeah.
But also, how do we communicate the difference between a battery that is perhaps in better condition in comparison to another one? Because I've never looked at a dealer's website, listened to a phone call and heard a dealer justify and explain that vehicle is maybe priced a bit higher because actually the battery is newer and it's in better condition. I've never heard that information communicated to a consumer, yet we know they have those fears, they have those concerns. So are there any ways that you can see that dealers can perhaps use that data to add even more peace of mind?
It's in terms of pricing the vehicle, I think it's very business specific because different businesses price in different ways. And like, if you're using Auto Trader, for example, and you're pricing at, X percentage of Auto Trader, or like there are some constraints there. And so I think there's no like one size fits all answer for particularly where I said we are at the market at the moment with the valuation companies working on this stuff. So I think again it comes down to transparency. It comes down to information and explaining it with the customer as well as you can, right? And giving them the information, helping them buy. I think I maybe stole this tagline from somewhere. I can mention lots of businesses that use it, right? Luscombe's is one. Rather than selling them the car, right, is really helping them buy. So yeah.
I think on that, we've always, a customer traditionally has always looked at the quality of a used vehicle via mileage covered and service history. So I think what you're saying is exactly the same. We just have to reposition with EVs what the customer would normally see as mileage and service history. And that will then come into the battery health will be key there. I think from a dealer's perspective on pricing, yes, you've got the broad brush Auto Trader. You need to be 100%, 102% of market value, etc. Do you become more targeted by specific vehicles, which I think dealers do to a degree anyway, based on desirability that we can get 110% for that, and that one's going to have to be 95 if we want to achieve a 10 times stock turn. Whether that can be done more targeted, but without creating a negativity around a stock. Because the last thing a dealer wants to do is say, that car's more expensive because the battery's better. What you're instantly saying is, so that battery's no good. So how do you communicate that without basically saying, yeah, that's the car nobody wants to buy? Or, yeah, that car's the one that hasn't got great service history or had a bit of an engine problem 30,000 miles ago. Then we've got a negative problem now. And the last thing you want to do is discuss negatives when you're trying to sell something. So that will be a challenge.
I guess it's the same as we've always described vehicles as low mileage, but you would never put on your website high mileage as in the description, would you?
Exactly. Yeah, you let the price determine that the customers can work that out.
I think the good thing for where a lot of people are right now is that, and this is a bit of research we did when we started the business, is looking at how people value a car when they they don't know the health of the battery versus when it's known, right? And actually, what you see is that people expect the battery health to be a lot worse than it is because they're thinking about iPhones and things like that. And if you market a car without a battery health certificate, people tend to value it similarly as a vehicle with a battery health in the mid-70s%, and that's just super unlikely for how most batteries are today, right? The vast majority of results are like well in the 80s and 90s, particularly for the used EV park as it is today. So yeah, the vast majority of results actually people are positive surprised and say, look, this thing's great. It's been super well made, looked after, and it's a good car.
I would have guessed would have been lower as an average, and I've been in the industry for 15 years, so it's reasonable to think you're right that customers presume it's worse. And
yeah, we have a pretty good pulse check on the vehicles in the UK market. And I think the average number we see when we last tested it is about 94% of all the cars we test, or that's the average state of health of all the cars we've tested.
What's the average age at the moment you're testing? Or do you do it on
I
age
think
or
we're
mileage?
about 3.5 years.
Right, okay.
Better than iPhone. Definitely better than an iPhone. Definitely.
well, your phone battery starts disappearing after the first week, doesn't it?
It does, exactly. What kind of stuff? Is it literally just mileage that degrades them, or is it how they get charged?
No, I'd actually say mileage is probably the least good predictor, right? And there's one of our customers, I think, found a really good niche in terms of selling high mileage cars with a good battery, because you can obviously buy them at a good price, and actually, if you can create that reassurance, then all better for your margins. But other things like, has it been rapid? How much has it been rapid charged? Has the car been stored at 100%? A lot of the OEMs have now got that 80% guidance in there, but there's a lot of people who just top it up to 100% every night. Deep discharges, so charging all the way up to 100 and all the way down to 0. You've got those heavy usage vehicles. How much power you're putting through the battery. Like if you've got a heavy foot, and you like your acceleration, that all those things can cause slightly faster degradation. And
Is that historical charging history available within the software of the car to download from a diagnostic, or is that still not obtainable? Do the cars record that?
Depends on the make and model of car.
Right.
But the thing it influences is the health of the cells, health of the pack.
Yeah.
So really, that's the that's the output that matters, I guess.
It's interesting to think about what the quality of the used EVs is going to be in a few years. If the majority of new EV sales are fleet and leasing, and people are going to care less about the impact on the battery, are you just going to have this flood of used EVs with terrible battery health just coming back in the next few years?
I read that on all the Facebook forums. People. One of the ones that when I was trying to understand the the mindset, there's a lot of people say, well, it's a lease car, so I drive it like I stole it, right? Especially on an EV when it goes fast and all that sort of stuff. But I mean, in the first few years, it's the vast majority is still going to have very good batteries. But I think it's going to be an interesting thing because clearly the incentives there aren't aligned between the finance company whose balance sheet that expensive asset is sitting on, and the driver who just wants to use the car. They're already not getting the WLTP range, and then I'm being told to charge it only to 80% of the real range. Actually, I just want to get the maximum juice from this vehicle. So, I think it'll be an interesting thing. We're going to keep publishing data as it comes in.
And I guess, having a centralised logistics system where you don't need to charge the vehicles as much, you're also not putting it in the hands of somebody to be driving, having their foot down, driving it like they stole it because it's not their car, will become even more important in keeping that battery health in the best possible condition.
Yeah, a friend of mine had a Salsac card delivered to him the other day, and clearly the trade plate driver who delivered it just floored it the whole way there. It's definitely interesting what the things that will change over the next few years with EVs across everything.
I think if battery health testing becomes a key part of service history, like we check the oil on a nice car, same thing with the battery. And if that's routinely done, whether it's annually, whether it has to be every 6 months with the battery, and that will then maximise the value and longevity of that battery, because you can repair batteries, can't you, to a degree? So
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the other thing we're thinking about is actually how do we help people use the vehicle better, or in a way that helps them look after that expensive thing that they've just bought, right? Especially if they've, it's on an HP or they've bought it for cash, right? It's like, and it is a big shift in terms of, most people just want to get from A to B, but now they've got this expensive thing that you kind of need to look after. And, how do we give people gentle education and nudges to use this battery and car in the best way possible for their future wallet?
The lease company taking it back. I mean, if you get a car with a 90% and one with a 30%, how can you price that into a PCP, or just based on how that person drives it or charges it, or how many times you use launch mode or whatever it is?
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because I actually started my career in the leasing industry, building software for leasing companies, and the terms of a lease have to be understandable to a consumer, right? And I don't think we're at a stage yet where you could put battery health in there, because the terms have got to be things that they can control, right? Like I can control how much mileage I do, but there are a lot of factors that add up to the degradation of a battery. So we're a way off yet, but I could see, for example, perhaps there might be some constraints on how you charge, or things like that. I mean, it's unfortunate potentially because to your point around who has access to public charging and who can charge at home, there's demographic and income differences there between those groups. Generally speaking, people who can charge at home have a driveway, bigger house, probably have more money broadly, and those who need to rapid charge in public. So we need to think about that side of it, if that's affecting the terms of your lease as well. But it would be super interesting to see how it pans out.
I think that one thing the lease companies could do is that all EVs have to be maintenance only, as opposed to you don't have the option to have non-maintenance. So you have to take it to a certified network to have your battery health history monitored and measured. That will give confidence to the future value setters and potential purchasers of that car.
Yeah,
several years' time.
We would love it to be in the MOT as well. More for there being a public record of that. Clocking is obviously the major fraud for tampering with vehicles in the ICE world, but actually, we've got to start thinking about how we develop systems to protect against that for the world of EVs.
That's a wrap for today's discussion. A big thank you to all of our guests and all of our sponsors for sharing their amazing insights. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss any episodes of The Armchair Show. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Armchair Marketing.